So, how can we start turning this Dwarf Alberta Spruce into a bonsai tree? Well, let's find out.
All right, so here we are, Dwarf Alberta Spruce. This is a very common species that are found in people's yards and garden centers. It's a dwarf conifer. And so what I wanted to do was find one that's a twin trunk, because I wanted this species in particular because I really like the characteristics of the foliage. And if you're not familiar with that, you can, look up Dwarf Alberta Spruce to see what that grows like. But in addition to that, I wanted to find one that is a twin trunk tree, because I have pretty much all my trees are single trunk, and ever since I was in high school I wanted to get a twin trunk bonsai tree. So this was one that I finally found that had that twin trunk after searching. I actually only had to look at like 2 Home Depots, so that's like, I don't know, maybe 100 plants, and I finally found one. So what I'm doing right now is I'm cutting off all the foliage on the inside in between those 2 trunks so that nothing is crossing over, and over there I cut off the apex, so we're gonna have one trunk taller, one trunk shorter. We kind of form this triangle, and even though there are 2 trunks, artistically we're styling this so that they both work kind of in unison, and it looks like, if you look at the foliage, it's kind of the same as one individual bonsai tree where we have, the first branch, second branch, you have one apex, but it's just styled kind of differently, where one half of the tree is going to have half of those branches and the other half of the tree is going to have the other half of those branches. So of course I'm cleaning out everything out of the bottom to expose that trunk. Pretty much everything except for one little branch we're going to leave on the bottom to thicken up that trunk just a tiny little bit. And so here I started wiring these branches into place, and around the middle of this tree, the branches aren't really that great. And I mean, you can see these bottom ones are not very thick either. This is, one of those $10 very young plants. But we're going to do the best we can and just wire what we have into place. And then eventually those branches will thicken over time. All right, so it started raining, so I decided to bring this tree inside and just finish working on it today, because I want to just get this out of the way and, publish the video. So basically we had a branch there that wasn't really working. It was very big. It was almost like a third trunk, so I just cut that off. And then here I'm just deciding which of these branches I want as the lower branch. And so the following branches up the tree are kind of small, so there's going to just be a gap in between those, in between that first bottom branch and the branches higher up on the tree. Although when those top branches grow a little bit older, they're going to fill in that gap and we're going to wire them down. But for now, it's just kind of going to be a little bit of a flaw, but whatever, there's not really much I can do. So I picked that branch, I wired it into place, and a number of these I'm going to end up cutting a little shorter anyways, but right now I just cut the wire the full length of the branch. I bent it down into place to kind of see what it looks like with all the foliage there, and then if we need to, we can always shorten them up. All right, so now I'm going to wire these middle branches into place, and like I said, they're very short. They're maybe 1.5 inches long at best. So very thin, really not good for a final style, but of course this is a $10 plant from Home Depot, so a final, refined styling. And I mean, really, there isn't ever a final styling. The trees that we use for this art form are always growing, but what I mean is that I would like them to be thicker and more refined, but there's absolutely no way we were going to do that today. So the best I can do is take all of these small branches and wire them into place. And even if they're thin, they're at least set in place, so as they grow older, they're going to thicken and hold that position which they were set in. And then that foliage pad, when it starts growing horizontally, it's going to be right where we want it. So I'm going to take a lot of these middle branches, wire them down, and then there is a lot of foliage in this middle section, so I'm going to end up cutting off a lot of the branches here and there, and that's kind of hard to describe in this video, without somebody being right next to the tree in person and saying, okay, well, I'm going to cut off this branch because it's a little bit too close to that one. But I mean, the main idea here is that we kind of want to stagger the branches out, leave some negative space in the tree. So this one that I'm wiring right now, I think that's a good position, but the ones directly underneath it, I'm probably going to cut off so that we can thin that area out a little bit. And as you can see, the apex is a little bit overcrowded as well, so I'm probably going to have to chop some more back on that apex. All right, so what we're going to do now is keep wiring these top branches, and it's still a little bit overcrowded here, so I'm going to have to chop some of these branches off, and it's kind of hard to explain that, even, recording the majority of it in this video, as to which branches you should keep, which branches you should cut off. I mean, of course, it's up to you, but to me, I'm looking just for the branches that have the most potential, the most buds on them, and the ones that are closest to the kind of mental picture I have for this tree. And some of them, they're kind of, underneath this larger branch like there, so I cut it, and there's a huge gap in the tree now, but the branch that I want to wire into place is going to be going downwards, so it's going to fill up that gap. So that's kind of what you got to keep in mind when you're selecting branches and when you're doing pruning on a tree that hasn't been wired yet. You kind of have to think about where you want the branches to go and where you're going to need that negative space. And so what I did here was pretty much the only time on the tree where I took one piece of wire and wired to two branches with it. That's kind of like a quote-unquote rule. Wire two branches with the same wire. I think that lends stability to it, but I don't know, I just kind of tend to not do that too often, mostly because I forget and I don't really care a whole lot about it. And yeah, this is pretty much the first initial styling of this tree. As you can see, and like I've said, the branches towards the top of the tree are very, thin and small. Not a whole lot we can do in terms of refinement. So I just kind of set the branch in place, that main kind of what we'd call a backbone of the branch. And that's all going to grow into foliage pads later on, which we can refine. So here we go. Here's the Dwarf Alberta Spruce initial styling. I'm looking forward for this tree to fill out because, like I said, once this species fills out, it kind of has these nice cloud-like foliage pads. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm glad I finally found a twin trunk tree, and I'm glad I finally found a Dwarf Alberta Spruce that I like. So like I said, here's the initial styling. I think that's going to be it for now, and I'll be coming back with this tree once we have some more growth and more things to style.